Click the right button now. All right, and I do see some hands up there. So if you do have hands up, please put the questions into Q&A or into the chat window. The hand up might be from that chat disabled thing. Right button now, which should be good. All right, and I do see some hands. Oh, sorry, I was hearing myself on YouTube with a slight delay, so we're good. All right, so chat should be enabled now, I think. If it is not, 1 second, let me chat. Let me do this one more time. Nope, everybody, there we go. Now we're good. All right, now we are all set with the chat window, so fantastic. All right, well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. I am super thrilled to be joined by Rushton Hurley, who I will let introduce in just a minute. But for those of you that don't know me, my name is John Smith, for real. I am the Senior Teacher Success Manager here at Book Creator. So lots of webinars, lots of conferences, all that good stuff. I see a lot of names that I recognize over there. So that is awesome. Thanks for being here. And I just had to say one fun fact before I let Rushton take over and kind of do his thing. I just have to let everybody know. And for those of you who really know me, this is not going to come as a shock because you've heard me talk and you've heard me speak before. But Rushton Hurley, right here in front of me, one of the quotes that I remember him saying or reading somewhere has been kind of like my guiding quote for the last 12 years. And it's really why I am here today. All right. And so that quote was, when children create for the world, they make it good. When children create for their teachers, they make it good enough. And that quote jump-started everything that I've been doing with digital bookmaking with students from, like I said, like 12 years ago. So this is a real honor for me to get to be here with Rushton, and really excited, especially with this topic. I think it's really awesome. Everybody's talking about this kind of stuff. So Rushton, I'm going to hand it over to you. And I'm sure I'm going to throw some things in here and there just as we chat through this, but I'm going to let you run with it. Thanks for
Well,
being here.
thanks, John. Honored to be with you and with the book creator team and everything. This is really good fun to be able to share some ideas. Lots of folks from different parts of the world, Macedonia and Croatia and Argentina. Bienvenidos, and that would be much more Spanish than say Croatian that I know. So there we go. But I am excited to talk to you about another thing that is a way we communicate, and that would be generative AI. And in particular, those of you who are like, oh my God, is this going to be like one more webinar where it's like, here, this is how you put in a prompt? The answer is no. The idea here is that we're gonna hit this in a lot deeper detail than one usually finds. I'm going to do that thing that I always do, which is remind myself that I should have some toggle captions going on. So with that, you can see those at the top of the screen. It'll be one really, really big long sentence, which is not going to be the favorite element for those who are really into grammar, but I just help somebody, so all good there. You'll see lots of images. These are ones that I have the legal right to use for free, and I always cite it because one should. And I'll get off my stepladder on that one. I'll give you this link at the end of the session as well. This will get you back to all the slides. So if these slides can help you out, by all means, go right ahead. We want these ideas to be ideas that help loads and loads of people. So I wear two hats with regard to what I'm doing here today. The first one is my work as a nonprofit dude. All right, I have been doing Next Vista for Learning for almost 20 years now. And the idea that a Japanese language instructor could start a company that would last 20 years, not one you should have bet on back then. But as it turns out, it's still going, despite my original plans. So there you go. But I also, in the last year and a half, have taken on a different role. And I am the director of innovation at a high school here in San Mateo, California, called Junipero Serra High School. And that gives me the opportunity to explore as many different ways to get kids to go, whoa, cool, as possible, which is, I think, a pretty good way of describing my work. But in thinking about what we're doing today, we're going to point to one very specific thing, which is generative AI. And I recognize that there are those who are like, oh my God. Now, they may not be watching this one, or they may be with that thought that, hey, maybe you can tell me something that just makes me feel a little bit better about this. because that is actually partly the goal. Because I think when we really begin to look at some of the potential in this, we can get quite excited. Now, I'm going to frame this by just starting with what I would call the four phases of generative AI in education. So they look like this. The first phase is students cheating. So, they're learning about ChatGPT via TikTok, and they're like, wow, this will write my paper for me. That's been beaten to death, I would say, not the issue, but certainly the topic, and will not be what I focus on because while that is important, I want to bring something different to the conversation that allows you to see some new possibilities here. The second phase would be teachers who are like, oh my God, this is going to save me a ton of time. And yes, you can absolutely use all of these tools, whether it's Perplexity, Claude, Gemini, any of these, to be able to save yourself a ton of time. However, that too is not what I'm going to talk about. I really want to look at the next pair of them, which I think are much more interesting. And so the third phase, as I see it, of generative AI in ed, first is that teachers are using AI to teach differently. So imagine what it means to have a tool like this and to do something different with it in the classroom. I teach a class called Creative Solutions for the Global Good. There's no tests and no papers and one project, and whatever that project is, it's whatever, like, in your heart and soul are like, this is what I want to spend my time on, and I want to make life better for others with this project. Cool. My job is mostly to just ask questions. How are you doing with that? Have you talked to somebody? What'd you learn from talking to that person? Did you talk to another person after talking to that person? Did that person tell you who you might talk to? How are you tracking these things? Have you ever used a spreadsheet before? How do you reach out via email? Do you know where to put that comma? Clearly not. So those kinds of things of just trying to get students in the habit of like doing some interesting stuff generate these kind of moments where suddenly these tools are really, really helpful. So, for example, a year ago, one of my students was was saying, "All right, so I want to do a project helping the homeless." I'm like, "Okay, good." And it's a homeless shelter in San Francisco. I'm like, "That's helpful." And she says, "And I want to do a bake sale and give them money." Now this is not my idea in this class, right? So, I'm more like, get to know the homeless shelter, find out what their challenges are, like come up with interesting ways that not donate, right? It's not quite the idea. However, it's a bit of a lame move as a teacher to be like, that's lame. So I didn't do that. So what I did do is I said, all right, tell me what you know about the homeless shelter. She's like, they serve the homeless. I'm like, so yes. And what is it that might be a particular challenge for them? She said, well, I'm not really sure. My mother volunteered there. I'm like, oh, okay, no, good. That's good to know. So let's figure out what we need, because if you're going to donate money, you want to know what that money's going toward. And I called up ChatGPT and I said, everybody, take a look, just look at what I'm putting in. And I put in, act as a financial auditor. Next week, you have a meeting with a homeless shelter in San Francisco, and you want a list of questions to tell you whether or not they are using their funds well. Here come these different questions, and the kids were like, whoa, because they were good questions. Using these tools to generate questions is actually kind of a better move often than getting it to generate information. Now, that said, we are going to look at what I call the fourth phase of generative AI in education as a way of really beginning to say, well, what is it we can do if students are actually raising their academic game using these tools? So this is where like the teachers are no longer involved in a sense, right? I mean, we have to train them to do this well and creatively and honorably. But if what we want is for a student to become a better student, how do we do that? There's all kinds of things we've been doing for years, a lot of which hasn't been very effective. You should study more. Oh, great. Great. Right. What we want to do is we want to be like, hey, here's a hack. Right. And so with that in mind, this is how we're going to jump into what we do today. And if you want to be sitting there while you're taking in this webinar, and kudos to you for doing so, feel free to like toss some things into the generative AI tool of your choice as we go. Perfectly good for you to be doing that. Now, in order to do that for what we're doing, I want you to think of something you teach. I don't mean the subject, right? Like I don't mean like world history, right? Rather, pick something out of world history. So, it might be let's just say, the fall of Rome or whatever it might be. But you pick something that is a topic rather than the entire subject. Have that in your head, and then that'll allow you to look at some of these examples that we've got going over the coming half hour or so, and to work with them in interesting ways. So the first thing that I think we can do that's quite interesting is teach kids to preview. So what do I mean by preview? The idea here is that you tell a kid, hey, if you can get into the habit of either finding on a syllabus, if there is such a thing, right? A syllabus, what it is you're about to study, like maybe tomorrow in class, the teacher is going to start something new and you can figure out what it is, then you've got room to do some really interesting things. So now, years and decades ago, you could have done the same kind of thing using the textbook and reading ahead, but nobody ever did that. So if what we want is to say, hey, I want you to preview, then we're not going to be like, read ahead in your textbook, it'll help you. Instead, what we want to do is we want to say, hey, look, check out this. What's important for me to know about, and then fill in the blank. So in this case, I have wildfire smoke on the screen, right? But it could be anything, cell division, fall of Rome, whatever it might be. What's important for me to know? And your job as a student is not to use this kind of clever little prompt to memorize the living daylights out of what it generates, because there are certain things you always keep in mind about generative AI. It may be completely and utterly wrong. It's almost surely biased. Why? Because it's drawn from the writings of human beings, and human beings are, well, biased, right? So given that, we're really just trying to figure out what kind of bias it is, because that's just a part of the process of reading anything. What's the perspective that someone's coming from when they write this? What is the perspective that generated through algorithms this particular kind of writing that this tool put together, right? So now what we want to do is we want to just kind of have these things in mind, where it's like, all right, what's important to know? And then it generates some things, and you're looking at it and you're like, right? And when you go into class the next day, the teacher is introducing everybody to this stuff, and everybody's getting it for the first time. You are connecting the dots. So suddenly it's like, it's a lot easier to understand stuff when you've seen a little bit of it before. Who knew, right? Matter of fact, so. But it is very much the case that we haven't, by and large, given students a path to previewing that they would actually use. I've told them they should read ahead, but if they don't, then that's the issue, isn't it? Right? So what we want to be are people who are more into the outcome than we taught it, right? Because sometimes there's broadcast and no reception. Just saying. All right. So that's one, right? What is important to know about? And so you can take, whatever the topic was that hit your head, put it in and see what it generates, and just see, is this good stuff? Is it? You could actually use what it generates as part of what you do as a teacher. But I'm particularly interested in having kids begin to say, this is giving me a preview. I find it easier to understand things in class. We want to help them get there.
Rush, also, if I can stop for a second, I love this. I as a former special ed teacher, I think that too often my kids came into any class, whether it was mine or an inclusion class, and they were kind of sitting there just being like, I don't know what you're talking about. I did not read ahead like you asked, and so they kind of come in with this disadvantage. And whether you're special ed or any child for that matter, if you get this preview, it's kind of like it's like Cliff Notes on steroids, but it's also kind of like a movie trailer, right? Where it's getting you excited about something that you're about to learn, but it's also giving you some seeds so that when the teacher does start to talk about this topic, any child can say, oh, yeah, like you said, connecting the dots, which in turn is going to make them feel more successful anyway, because now they have they can be valuable partners in this process.
Totally. Matter of fact, let's use your cool tangent on the trailer and think about how these technologies are developing. So rather than just generating text for us, we're awfully close to being able to say things like, what's important to know about this? Put it together in a podcast. Well, that's what Notebook LM is, right? So that tool is already available to us. Or what's important to know about such and such? put that together as if it were a movie trailer in 2 minutes. All right. Make it a sci-fi and do this, this, and this. These things are going to be able to do this.
That's
Make it
amazing.
into a video game that I can play. This is not crazy things to be talking about. Like it's been in the last couple of months that a lot of the video game companies have been like, here's how we're going to use generative AI so that players can generate games on the fly, which is
So
pretty
crazy.
amazing stuff, right?
Yeah.
Let's get back to just the basics, right? Because if we're talking about previewing to get ahead, how do you build on that advantage? Well, a few classes into it, you go back to that same topic and you put in, what are common misconceptions people have about topic? So now, common misconceptions. Oh, now you're looking through that and you're thinking, was I thinking that? Or have I heard people talk about that? Or what question might I ask in class tomorrow about that misconception? Now you're actually learning to walk into class with questions prepared. Man, you can go from being like a C student to an A student pretty fast if you're doing some of these very, very basic things. And it's not as if, it's rocket science. It's just that people don't do it. So if this as a hack using generative AI, is the kind of thing that gets a student into a space where, he or she will use it, perfect, perfect, perfect. So there are all kinds of cool things that come from thinking about misconceptions. And you can imagine some really good classroom activities built around what it gives you, right? So guys, here's a misconception that the ChatGPT said, exists about such and such topic. Is it correct? Talk to each other, go, right? And then you can be doing these things. Let's keep going. So after we talk about misconceptions, let's say we're now into like 2 weeks into the unit and we're getting close to actually getting like assessed on it in some way. All right. Well, how do we build up for it? One is to say, I need a vocabulary list, and so with a vocabulary list, create a list of vocabulary words related to your topic, and for each provide a definition. Nice. This is just a little thing where you're like, is that a term that's come up in class that I had kind of missed? I remember people talking about that, but I didn't quite get it. Okay, and now you're looking at these terms and you're saying, hey, all right, here's how I can begin to build a set of tools that I can use using this hack, right? So that I can find my way into how to study for these tests that might be useful. Now, one might quite rightly say, hey, look, that's a real nice thing, except that often what it gives you is more complex English than what that kid's going to know. Well, right. Therefore, fourth tip, let's talk about how we work with language. And with that, you can say, rewrite this at Lexile. Now, all three of these are part of the same subset of tips. So you're getting bonus tips as a part of this webinar. How good is your life? Just saying. All right, now, so look at this first one. Rewrite this at Lexile, and then the 100 number, like 600 is roughly sixth grade in the United States. 400 is roughly fourth grade in the United States. Somebody with much more experience in kind of reading strategies and experience would be able to give you much more there. However, you don't want to tell a high schooler, tell it to rewrite it as if you're a sixth grader, because no one wants to be like, but I'm not a sixth grader. I'm I'm a 10th grader, and I don't want to feel stupid, and therefore, instead, if you teach them this magic word, Lexile, rewrite this at Lexile 600, now it'll rewrite those items in simpler English, assuming you're using English, and now you're in pretty good shape. So now when we think about language, it's like, well, is that all it does with the language? No. You can take a passage that you've written and say, clean up this English. Now here's where we're going to have people like, no, the kids need to learn to do that themselves. Yes, they do. Absolutely. Does that mean that they can never, ever use this to learn to do it? I think that's a much more open question. Now, if they never learn to do it because they have this crutch, that would be a shame. But this is kind of the calculator moment, right? For writing, right? And we have to kind of stop and say, can we use this particular tool in a way that gets us there? I would contend we probably can. But even looking at what it is, you can imagine a teacher saying, here's a passage. It's kind of poorly written for reasons that I'd like people to understand. Here is the cleaned up version that Perplexity gave us. Now talk to each other in your groups. What do we see? So this can be a tool you use to teach with. This can be a tool that the student uses. I get that lots of teachers would be like lots of students would say, "Hey, I'm just going to use this thing that it gave me." That is an issue, but that's a different issue than banging your head against the wall because someone tells you to keep getting better at writing and you don't understand what they're telling you and how to do it. Now, providing feedback on passages can be an interesting way to do this as well. So these tools all do this a little differently or a lot differently. And by putting stuff you've written into it and saying, provide feedback on this, you're mostly in the space of, is this feedback that I think is valuable? And that's what you want to teach the kids to do. To really stop and say, is this valuable? Is this a valuable set of thoughts for me? Which ones do I like and which ones do I not like and why? And make that part of what happens in class so that now students are really getting into a space of being able to turn to someone at any time of day or night and get some feedback. It may not be perfect feedback, but then again, the feedback that humans give is not always perfect feedback either, right? So it's a tool. It's a tool. Let's find a way to use it that gives kids more and more and more confidence about what they do. We are so not done with the tips on generative AI. So let's keep going. As you get close to that assessment, like I was mentioning earlier, right? Now you can really put in some pretty amazing things like, okay, I'm in environmental science, right? And we're talking about wildfire and climate change. Act as an environmental science teacher, prepare a set of 10 short answer questions about the relationship between wildfire and climate change for each provide an answer. Now, this is going to generate either some stuff that's kind of right in space or too complex or too easy, right? The Goldilocks approach. So if it's too easy, that's something we're going to hit in some detail here in a minute. If it's too hard, we already know what to do. Rewrite this at Lexile 800. Make this question simpler. One of the first times I tried this, though, it was too easy. It was just asking like, kind of just, do you know the answer questions? And so what I did was I followed it. Remember these tools are designed to be chats. So you produce something or you get it to produce something. Here it comes. And then you put something in that allows you to work with what was there. Translate this into Spanish. Rewrite this at Lexile 600. That's part of a chat where you're getting it to do something, right? Here is the simple follow-up I did on one of these. Make each one more difficult. And man, this is fantastic for getting a kid to go, okay, do I still understand these things? Assuming you understood it before, do I still understand it at the kind of language that is being used to describe these things now, or the kind of complexity that's being used? Because what it'll do is it'll generate stuff where it's like, all right, that's the kind of thing that might be in a college assessment, but that's part of just asking yourself questions about this stuff. I'm not sure about this. I want to ask a question about this in class tomorrow. Good. We're back to asking questions and preparing questions for class, which is really, really cool. Now that's 5 of 6 game-changing ways that we've gotten there, right? So here, let's review.
I got to go back to that one for a second, Rushton. So
Go ahead.
the other day, everybody who knows me knows I love stories, but my son comes home, right, and he didn't get such a good grade on a science test, right? And he's like, "Why? I know what I know, right? Like I know everything that I should have known." And I was like, "Well, clearly something wasn't right." And he's like, "Well, I studied. I did the review packet, right, or whatever it was that the teacher gave, but she asked questions that weren't on the review packet, right?" And I was like, maybe she's trying to dig a little deeper into the knowledge, and the review packet was just there to kind of guide you, right? And that maybe you need to know things a little deeper, be able to apply them. I love this as an approach for that, whereas where he can be like, all right, I did my practice packet and I understand it, but put in a prompt where the system is now giving you extra questions that deepen your thinking so that he can be like, okay, some of these are not what we talked about in class. This one is, and I know it. Like I know what it is, and he can explain it. So I love this. I'm gonna use this one.
I'll tell you, you're pointing to something that is so fundamentally important about the experience of a student in school that we rarely hit in any articulated way, which is this. If a student says, I know what I know, their sense of what it is they know is not expansive enough to get them excited about what they're learning because they're just memorizing. Right?
Yep.
Typically, that's what's going on. And so if you hear a student say something like, well, I know what I want to say, I just can't say it. It's like, you're not a bad person for saying that, but if you can't say it, you don't yet know it in the sense that we want to say it. When I say you know it, I'm not saying you've seen it once before. I'm saying you can intelligently describe it back to me and work with ideas related to the topic that's covered in it. That's where we want to be, right? And
Yep.
so to whatever extent these tools can allow us to get students to think more about how they know, what it is they know, what it means to say we know it, that's great. That has nothing to do with this writing an essay for us and everything to do with how we think about our own learning and can we use these tools to kind of accelerate how students think about their own learning in new and cool ways. So let's jump to like this level of things. We've talked about the power of preview, right? What's important to know about. What are common misconceptions about? Create a list of vocabulary words related to and for each provide a definition, right? Rewrite this at Lexile 600, right? Give me 10 short answer questions and for each provide an answer. And then, you make the adjustments all along the way as you do all of these things. And this thing actually allows us to begin looking at how they might serve as a tutor of some kind. Now, this is an idea that people put out there. And often when they do, they're not painting a picture of what this might really mean. Clearly, I say clearly, I think clearly, none of the current generative AI tools, as we have them, really function as a good tutor would. But if what we want to do is we want to say, these things aren't going to replace teachers. They're never going to replace teachers. I'm like, which teachers, right? Because a teacher who really draws upon the experience and the rapport with the child and to be able to motivate that student to do that. No, we haven't seen tools that do that. A teacher that just asks kids to memorize things and that's it. These tools can replace that teacher now. So if we're thinking about this as a tutor, what does that mean? So I want to look at a couple of examples of this that I think are exactly the kind of thing you and colleagues could sit down and be like, can we build prompts that do some really interesting things? So my first example is with Plato's allegory of the cave. It's probably something there's all of the Plato back in the day is like, okay, there's a fire, there are these kind of puppets. And so people are seeing things as shadows on a wall. And they're told that's reality. So that's what they see as reality. Somebody like gets away and goes up and is out in the light. And it's like, kind of an intense experience, but they realize the world is far more. And they go back to tell people, oh, hey, this is the real reality over here. And those people are like, no, it's right there on the wall. Right. So wonderfully amazing stuff that is, I mean, Plato, like he knew what he was doing without a doubt. But what if we want to get kids to respond to questions about the allegory of the cave? Act as a tutor to help a student learning about Plato's allegory of the cave. Ask one question at a time that helps the student practice answering questions about the allegory and give feedback on the student's answers. This is a point of departure prompt. It might or might not kind of do what you want it to do, but this is where the kinds of things you put in to ask it to do the next thing become more and more important. And in doing this, what you'll find is these tools are getting better and better all the time, practically by the week, at acting in this capacity where the algorithms that generate this stuff are actually useful in what they punch out to help someone go, that's what that must be about. And we come back to the same things we talked about before. It could be completely wrong. We want to have that critical. Oh, there we go. It could be completely wrong. We need to have the critical thinking sense that allows us to stop and go, is this really a good answer? What kind of question might I ask about it? Is it giving me bias stuff in some way? Almost surely, right? So getting into these pieces, we're now trying to get it to challenge us to create tools that might be exceptionally useful for preparing kids to walk into class with good questions so that they're becoming better at figuring out things earlier, which makes them more confident as students, which means that you've got more and more kids in the class who are confident learners, which will kind of pull along other kids to some degree. Oh, here's this hack that I've been using. Fine, right? Let's do another one. In this case, let's get into my field. So my field, I was a Japanese language teacher for years. Occasionally I have a kid come in the first day of school and say, you don't look Japanese. And I would say, I don't. Right. And there you go. But learning language is one of those things that requires a lot of repetition, but not just repetition in terms of, like, do I have this memorized, but practice back and forth using the language. Act as a tutor for a student beginning Spanish. The student is learning vocabulary about sports. Engage the student in a conversation in Spanish to learn what he likes, how often he plays, and similar questions. If the student makes a mistake in how he builds his sentences, reply by repeating the sentence with corrections. Extend the conversation for about a dozen questions. I was stunned at how good a job ChatGPT did with this prompt, where it would ask a question, how often, what's your favorite sport? I really like basketball. That's great that you like basketball. How often do you play? You can fine tune along the way. So even though you're engaged in a conversation, you can put in a follow-up prompt that does something quite interesting. And by and large, if you word that prompt well, it'll engage in the conversation being generated in a way that's really quite powerful. Now, again, look at these are obviously more complex than what are common misconceptions about wildfire smoke. However, when we think about these kinds of things, where we are the people who know what kinds of conversations might help a student get more and more confident with material, then what we need to do is just practice building these kinds of things to see if any given tool, Claude, whatever, right, can do a good job of generating those kinds of questions in a way that will be helpful to students. That's what we do as teachers. We figure out how kids can learn. This is not about us being, the superheroes that swoop in and give the answers. This is about us being the people who give kids the confidence that they can learn it themselves. And so now we're thinking about this stuff at another level. And so how you begin to look at this and you begin to think, what do I need to do? Play with this stuff. You need to just play with it, right? So this is true for any ed tech. It's true for, like really cool digital media materials like Book Creator, right? And you just play, right? Because if you see one webinar and it says, this is how to use, tool X, and you're like, good, I've got it. That would be ridiculous. You have to get in and play with it. So how you go about that means that you've got to have a certain philosophical framework. So as we look at generative AI, just a couple of reminders that it predicts words does not mean this stuff is sentient. It's not. It's just a bunch of algorithms. It looks like writing, but even the word writing is a little problematic because writing is what you do when you draw upon your experiences in certain kinds of way. These entities, these beings, they're not beings. These tools, thank you very much, have no experience to draw on in any meaningful way. They're just predicting words. And even though what it generates might sound very, very confident, this is the answer to your question, that does not mean it's accurate. And so we use those kinds of frames in order to use these tools exceptionally well for getting students to be more and more critical of what it is they encounter. So, Book Creator. There are some very specific advantages of Book Creator as a tool for thinking about how we work with any given piece of information. So imagine that what you want, right, is to have kids use a certain kind of prompt, a piece of text, an image, or something like this. Here's one I did a few years ago that right during the pandemic when people would go out with their kid and just see if they could spot a teddy bear in a window, and like that was a game that people would play, and people would put teddy bears in their windows. And there's something kind of beautiful about that, let me just say. But the key piece is right over here. You can record yourself, video or audio. You can record yourself as a part of these books. And so now you have kids doing things like saying, what's important to know about this? What are common misconceptions about this? And they're putting things that maybe they've written on, on a book creator page, and then they're recording themselves talking about what they see that got generated. I think this is good for this reason. I'm a little concerned about this for this reason. I'm beginning to understand that this stuff is all rather bland, right? That's what generative AI does. It produces a lot of bland writing. But if what you need at the moment is bland writing, good. So that's part of how we begin to say, hey, in getting kids to really show their thinking, if we can use a tool that draws upon video and audio and text and images in a way that is easy to share, it can be shown to parents, that's awesome. And this is a tool that does it. So several gifts, and then we'll do some questions if y'all have them. I certainly hope you do. I can't imagine that I covered every last thing that one would do in it. So several gifts for you. One is that I'm doing a wildfire project. That's why wildfire smoke was my example. Wow, big surprise. So what the wildfire project is an approach to using video that's different. So the idea is there's all these things that we should know, in order to prevent, understand, prepare for wildfires, right? And in doing that, we've created a bunch of very short videos that are boring. By design, they are visually boring, and they're short, 30, 45 seconds, this kind of thing. And the idea is that a kid can watch this video and go, okay, yeah, that's boring. And you're like, right, take the same info and make a cool video out of it for people your age. Now we're tricking them into using, the material very actively as they begin to put together, say, a screencasting piece or a stop motion piece or whatever it is they do. And again, you can imagine using the wide variety of tools you have in something like Book Creator to have the prompt embedded, have on the next page the video that they created, and then a lot of their own work explaining, I chose to do this way for these reasons. Where now we're kind of getting into the space. I actually put together some of these prompts using generative AI. You're like, oh gosh, then they can't be that good. No, I ran the prompts by experts, CAL FIRE people, state parks people, in order to say, hey, what do we need to change in this so that it would be really good material for them? And they're like, wait, generative AI did this? Really? Wow. So that's a part of how you can look at something like video prompts that are designed to be boring as a tool for getting kids to do some really interesting things and quite actively learn when they least expect it, right? Additionally, every week during the school year, I post a prompt and that prompt is twofold. It's a really, really cool short video. Always watch videos that other people give you before you show them to your kids. Always, 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 just saying, right? And some questions that you might use as prompts for discussion or writing. So feel free. I've written some books. Feel free to read them. They're not bad, I'd say. And if you read them and you're like, hey, can we connect and talk about this a bit? I've got my department or my grade level reading this stuff. Yeah, you bought some books. Happy to do it. Just let me know. So this is us. Us being me, rh@nextvista.org. Feel free to shoot me a note. I've got a newsletter, nextvista.org/newsletter. I put out once a month. Been doing it forever, right? Give away like a Starbucks chart every month because why not? And then here are the slides again, right? So with that, I think I managed to save a little time for getting into some questions, which I think is pretty exciting. That I saved time to do it, that is. And so, John, if you want, why don't you kind of talk to me about what questions we can jump into right away?
Yeah, absolutely. So everybody, if you have a question or a thought that you want to spark some conversation with, please put that into the chat window. I'll start off. I really this really opened my mind to different thoughts of AI. I admittedly before the webinar started, Rushton and I were talking, and I would say that I'm probably a little late personally, right, to the AI game. Mostly just because I have been so busy with things that I didn't have time to really just kind of sit and explore a whole lot. And the more I explore, the more I realize like, wow, this is really powerful, right? And after watching this and thinking about, the power of preview and understanding misconceptions and all of the things that Rushton talked about, my mind is just spinning, right, with ideas. But I think there was one thing that really kind of hit me there towards the end. It kind of wrapped it all up in a nice little ball. As Rushton was saying, like, okay, we can put the prompts here in the book creator, the kids can reflect and put an audio in there or a video in there. The whole thing that kind of came back to me was whether you're using book creator because it's easy and the kids love the different aspects of it, or they're using AI in conjunction with book creator because it's helping them as a tutor, it's helping them understand misconceptions, vocabulary. The whole idea for me is that it is bringing the power to the kid so that the kids aren't sitting in classrooms thinking that they're helpless and that they're never going to get an answer to this, or they just don't understand what the teacher's talking about or whatever. The whole idea here is that we're bringing the power back to the kids so that they can have some ownership in their learning, and that becomes more meaningful, right? In the long run, if the kid fully understands what they're doing and they fully take a appreciation of that, then they really are going to have deep understanding and learning of whatever the topic may be. So I love this idea of just bringing the power back to the kids, or maybe not even bringing it back, giving power right to the kids. I think is very powerful. And we did have a question. How would you introduce generative AI to third through fifth elementary students? What would be
So
the answer there?
yeah, so the kind of stuff that I'm talking about is largely focused on secondary students, middle school and high school. However, what you do as an elementary teacher is I think very important for helping students understand that these tools are not necessarily cheating tools. If a kid only hears about generative AI as a tool to cheat, that's how they'll think of it. But what we want is for teachers to say, this is something that can allow you to really look at a variety of ideas. Now, I know people are going to be like, oh, no, but they have to come up with the ideas themselves. Like, right. But how do you get them to where they do that kind of quickly and efficiently and effectively?
Yeah.
And if seeing examples is one way to do it, good. So we'll test that tiny URL
Yeah, I
in
may
order
have
to make
typed it in incorrectly.
it.
I'm going to answer that question too, Russian. So, Torrin, one of the things we had another webinar a while back, and Katie, if Katie's still on here, I'm sure Katie's going to find it in a matter of seconds because Katie's a genius. But we had a webinar a while back, and the idea was, can we use AI with Book Creator in a classroom, right? And it was young students. And so what this teacher did was I need everybody to break out into groups, right? So we broke everybody into groups. And so we're going to tell a story. All right. In this group, you're going to develop the main characters. This group, you're going to develop the plot. This group, you're going to develop the setting, and so everybody came up with each group came up with a different part of the story. They went to ChatGPT, typed in all of the information, said, write me a story with these characters, these plots, this setting, this. Boom, story plops out. And then they read it together as a class, right? And then the class is reading it, and the kids, you can see it on their faces. The kids are like, what? Like they're like, no, no, no. There's no way that little Johnny in the story would do that. No, 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 no. Johnny's smarter than that. So you could see them arguing like back and forth, like with what ChatGPT came out with. So then they would start to develop these ideas of, well, what do we need to change in our prompt to get something more like what we think is going on in our head? And so then they would do that as a group, and then they would change it, and then they would do this, and they would change it. And then eventually, after all these deep conversations, they had this really nice story, right? And that was done, I believe, if I remember correctly from the webinar, I think that was a group of second graders. So this is like, a same kind of thing. And I think I can't remember what the actual webinar was, but it was on our YouTube channel from a year or so ago. It was with Holly Clark. But it was a really great webinar. So if you go back to our YouTube channel and look for that one, AI book creator Holly Clark, you'll find it.
Well, Tracy mentioned an activity she did in class, right? Had her grade 5 students for science generate 5 multiple choice questions about the human body systems they were researching, and then told them I'll choose some of the questions for a test later. So one of those little teacher things we do, and totally good.
Yeah.
One thing for all of us to understand about these tools, right? We're so used to, okay, here's this tool, this technique, this issue, this topic. How do we deal with it? And having time to then deal with it. And whatever it is, whatever the way is that we deal with it, becomes like a thing we do. By the time we've gone through that process, these things have gone farther along and may no longer be doing the thing that we were worried about before, or maybe doing it far worse. We have to be in a space where we're really talking to each other regularly about it. And the more kids hear us talking about, hey, this is how to think about this at the moment. All right, or at least for me. And what I want to do is I want to keep seeing how these things develop and changing my opinion over time based on what I learn. I mean, I certainly, was originally a huge fan of social media way back in the day. Not so much now, right? But that's just who I am. So Toron has a question, I believe.
Yeah, I saw the hand up. So if you do have a question, we don't can't unmute anybody here. So just throw that into the chat window or the Q&A box. But yeah, I think that's the what you just said is so important because I think that as educators, what we are asking kids to do is to change, right? Change your thinking, change your understanding, change your grade, change your, school building. What the kids are always changing, but a lot of times it's hard for us to change, right? And we're like, oh, this is the way it's done, and it's not the way the world is going, right? So like we always have to adapt and change and move on to something different, and whatever. So that's kind of going through my head.
Well said, John. Anthony brings up like a good observation on this, and it reminds me of something that I haven't said up to this point that really needs to be said. So first of all, I really like that we can personalize things in interesting ways using these tools. That you can create stories about a little town in rural Nebraska and have it be a legitimate story about that little town. Do not put identifying information about students into these tools. Do not do that. We do not have the assurance, generally speaking, that these tools will treat that data in a way that we would want it treated. So we can use these, but we have to anonymize things all the time. And I'm glad that Anthony's comment. Let me read that comment. It's really cool. As a matter of fact, it's building off of somebody. So it's one, or anyway, Anthony wrote, great idea using auto draw in Book Creator to create story characters. Complement this very well so students can actively engage with the stories. Personalizing the protagonists and antagonists is phenomenal for positive engagement. Putting themselves into their work, and then publishing their work to see the reach is marvelous. I agree, using not their real names. So so let's keep that piece in there as well. But
Well, and I think
okay.
there was a school that in Georgia who really focused on this too, and with the power of AI, with the power of Book Creator together, I can create stories about anything that I want. If there are no stories about an astronaut named whatever I want to name my astronaut, not myself, then you know what? I can make a story about that, and so the ability to personalize your learning, the ability to create stories that are related to you and your situation and where you come from. All that stuff is very, very powerful. So love that. And yeah, it could be like the process of SAMR, right? Applied to ICT integration. So absolutely love these great ideas. All right. Well, I don't see any other questions. I know we are kind of at our time. Russian, I just want to say thank you so much for being here and doing this with us today. I do see one more Anthony Peters popped in there. So
Well, John, we've also got a really good one from Jennifer that I think I'll just leap in and talk to you real quick. Does that mean you should not use AI to help you edit reports? If your reports contain information about your students, then no, you should not use it to generate the kinds of things you might want, which is kind of a bummer because it can be really good for that kind of thing, but don't do it. Now you just don't want to put yourself in a space where parents are like, why is my kid's information, like getting fed into these things? Don says it's interesting that you talked about AI replacing teachers. My college professor for Intro to Technology posted that as a topic, and I agree with what you said. Teachers who only have students memorize facts could be replaced. I actually asked ChatGPT if teachers could be replaced, and it said human connection can never be replaced. which is not an answer to the question, except that it is, right? So if you have human connection in your teaching, then no, it's not, that's not going to be replaced. But these tools are going to get better and better and better and better. And the more we become the kind of professionals who figure out how to use them well, the better off we are and the kids will be. Thank all you guys for joining the webinar. And John, thanks for running this thing. This is great
Yeah.
to work with you again, man.
Absolutely. Great to see you. And thanks everybody for being here. Be safe out there. Happy bookmaking and safe AIing. I don't know if that's really a thing, but whatever. We're going to call it that. So thanks everybody. This video will be on our YouTube channel as soon as somebody approves it. I don't know, whatever, however that works, it'll be there. So later tonight, tomorrow, go back and watch this over and over again. Take these ideas with you. I know I am. So thanks, Russian, again. Have a great day, everybody.